All right, guys, we'll get going. How are we all doing? Please shout out into the chat if you can hear me. Say hi. Whereabouts are you listening in from? And what do you want to learn about knee pain this evening? Because I'm not too sure if it's going to be a big enough group. So we want to kind of make this as personal to everybody as we can. So yeah, just pop in the group, what you have going on, what you want to learn from the webinar, and yeah, I'll try to address it as we go through. Don't be shy. Alex, how you doing, Alex? Where are you listening in from? Or hey, you can all hear me fine. Give us a yes in the chat if you can all hear me well. Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Can you hear me? Yes, maybe. I think you can all hear me. I was just saying, yep, hear you fine. In Arklow with a broken hand, hearing you grand. Jesus, Paul. Sure, it's never a dull moment with you. In fairness, but yeah, you'll enjoy it tonight now when we go through a lot of this stuff. All right, without further ado, we will get going. Now, let me share my screen here. What isn't? That's it. Share screen. So there we go. Share, and I will start the. Where are we going to? Please start. There we go. Yes, there we go. Okay, guys, right. I am Diarmuid Hegarty. I'm the clinical director here at Resync Physiotherapy. And we are a small-ish clinic in the south of Dublin. Now we're located in Stepaside, Dublin 18, which is about 4 or 5 minutes off the M50. Sorry, there's more people just arriving in there that I need to let in. So basically, yeah, 41 Bellarmine Plaza, Kilgobbin in Stepaside. We service a lot of the area of South Dublin, North Wicklow. We have people coming in from Kildare, Mullingar, a few places down the country that come in to see us as well because they like what we do. Our basis is around physiotherapy, sports performance, women's health, strength and conditioning, and we do what we call unlimited rehab programs. Now, what this means is that it's one fee. You guys come into us, you pay us one fee, and we tell you what you're going to be like at the end of it. There's no, oh, sorry, 6 weeks is up and we're not going to be able to fix you. It's we keep going until we fix you, and you generally have your brand spanking new by the time you come out of it. So yes, it's guaranteed results. We're a mixture of physios and athletic therapists. Some people have their back up against athletic therapists. I think they're absolutely fantastic therapists. They are trained to treat sports injuries. Some physiotherapists are able to treat sports injuries, but also they go into hospitals and they have a lot of other skills that therapists don't have. But when it comes into private practice, these guys are absolutely excellent. Connor did his athletic therapy in Carlow, I think, and then he went and he did a master's in sports medicine over in the UK. Sarah did I think it was a sports and business degree or sports performance degree, and then she did a master's in physio in Dublin. And Peter then is an athletic therapist, and he works as research assistant in DCU. And then we have our lovely admin, Leonie, Rachel, and Stephen, unfortunately, has left us this week because he was our marketing dude, but he's gone on to bigger and better pastures. As I said, I'm Diarmuid Hegarty, clinical specialist, muscular physiotherapy, roughly qualified in 2009-ish. So about 12 years experience. Yeah, we've gone through a lot of patients, having worked in New Zealand, the UK, a bit of work in Australia, and then we came home and I set up what previously was known as Stepaside Physio, and then we went on to Resync Physiotherapy at about last year. So it's going from strength to strength. There is 4 or 5 therapists with us, and we're looking for more people to join our team as we are getting extremely busy in these times. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at knee pain. Now, I want everybody to pop into the chat what their issues are with knee pain, because I am going to cover a lot of this stuff today. So where's our chat? So let me know what you want to learn from today, or if you have any specific injuries, don't be afraid to ask a couple of questions, and we will get you the right information. So as you can see here on the right hand side, this is our lovely knee. Now I know it looks a little bit funny at the moment, but basically your knee is consisting of two bones that just sit on top of each other, just like that. And they're called a hinge joint. So that means they open and they bend and they close and they bend. But what actually people don't realize is that your foot can twist on either side, and your foot and your knee actually rotate. And what happens when you're going to move is not only does the knee go bend forward and backwards, but it also twists. Now, when it twists, it's going to irritate the meniscus. So you see these lateral collateral ligaments down in there. These are what's going to, where's it? Oh, meniscus. Yeah, the meniscus down in there is going to get irritated. So you imagine push your fist down onto the table in front of you and twist it. You can feel a little bit of friction that happens underneath the knuckles. And basically what happens when meniscal tears, which is your cartilage in your knee, what happens there is they just tend to tear, because over 15,000, 20,000 steps during the day, that's a lot of twisting and turning on one structure that's supposed to be able to tolerate its entire body load coming down on it. So what we have is you have your meniscus on either side, and you have your ligaments on either side of the knee, which create a lot of stability so the knee doesn't buckle on either side. And then you have on inside, what we have is your cruciate ligaments. So they're the ones deep into the center. And what happens then is they stop the knee sliding forward or sliding backwards. And then in and around it, you have very, very strong muscles called your quadriceps. And then they work off what we call our patella, which is our kneecap. And that creates a little bit more force when you're going to walking, and how your knee is going to absorb that force. So overall and all, for two bones that sit on top of each other like that, they don't tend to move too well, because they have such robust structures around it. Okay. So that's our knee. Down below, then you're going to have your tibia and your fibia. And they basically, the whole idea of the lower limb is designed to distribute load from your foot up into your hips or into your spine. Sorry, just have a look at the chat there. So it wants to distribute that load. Now think of it this way. If you jumped off a step and you kept your body completely rigid, your whole body and your hips and your spine is going to shake. It'll vibrate, because that load is not being absorbed as it goes up through your body. So what the knee and the foot and the hips are designed to do is distribute that load evenly, so your muscles are able to take it, and it takes a little bit more pressure off your joints. Okay, so that's the whole idea of the knee. And where am I going with this? So now we're going to look at, so let's see how they work. So let's have a look at this video here for a second. So this is your knee, and this is how your leg works. And these are your hamstring muscles that are bending up. Now they pull your knee up into that position. Now what they're also doing, if you look at the hamstrings, okay, they actually pull your knee backwards. All right. So they stop your knee from sliding forwards. So what happens is that if your hamstrings are not strong enough, I'll just let this play on a little bit more here. If your hamstrings are not strong enough, this will be a good position here when I pull this in. Let's see if that turns around. There we go. If your hamstrings are not strong enough there, what's going to happen is they're going to pull. They're not going to allow that knee to translate forward or backwards. And this is what happens with a lot of people when they go and they injure their knee, is they're very, very strong in the front of their knee, but these hamstrings don't work as well in the back. They're not strong enough to contend with the forces that come through. Because when you're walking, you end up using two different types of muscle groups called your quads, which are the big ones in front of your thigh, but also your soleus muscle, which is at the back of your calf a little bit further down lower. Now all of these need to work together as one unit to try and distribute that load. Now here's your quads in the other side of the thing. So those big massive muscles that attach onto your hips up here and then come right down into the front. And what they do is they try to extend your leg. So when you want to straighten your leg, those muscles kick in. Now these are the muscles that inherently get overworked in 90% of people. These are the ones that are problematic. They get too tired, their hamstrings aren't doing their job, and they're not able to contend with the load of the running that you're going through on that side of it. Now, if you look at this, now this might be just a little bit grainy. When you look at your knees, and we look at, this is a person, two pairs of legs, sorry, one pair of legs, two legs. Now, what's actually happened is they're not actually the strongest. And if you see these arrows, what's happening is the two knees there at the top are kind of drifting in towards each other, which means the hips further up are not using those, not pulling out that femur a little bit too much. Then what happens at the lower part of it is that lower shank, that tibia, starts to rotate on the bottom of it, as I mentioned earlier on. And then to counteract that, then your feet turn out into that position. So like you imagine trying to run in that position, those knees are going to drift inward, your foot's going to turn out even more. And that the direction of force of when you land is going to shoot straight through that knee a little bit more, and it's going to take a little bit more force. So it's going to break down a little bit more. So anybody, if you're standing and you're wearing a pair of shorts in a moment, look down at your feet. And if your feet are really, really turning out and you're kind of walk a little bit more like that, you don't have an awful lot of power in that foot to be able to produce force. So you're never going to be a sprinter. And what's happened is that you're probably just not strong enough in that area. And then if you have knee pain, that knee pain is going to drift, or that force is going to drift into that knee and cause a little bit of pain. Okay. So what do we want to do is we want to look at the difference between males and females, because females generally have more incidence of knee pain than males. And there's a reason for that. Number one is genetically their hips are just that little bit wider because they're bearing children. So what happens then is that as their hips are wider, then the knee is actually more in the center. So what we have is what we call a Q angle. So it's the angle between the straight line going up through the knee and the knee coming out to this outside bone in here. So if you look in males, on average could be the angle is about 12 degrees, but on females it's 16 degrees. So that's about 25-30% difference in that. And that can vary if you have exceptionally wider hips and you have a narrow stance. So that's why females generally tend to have a little more of an issue with knee pain than males. And what happens then if that knee drifts into that side is those hamstrings on the other side of that leg are at a disadvantage to work because their knees are drifting in, and then their glutes are at a disadvantage because their knees are drifting in. So you want everything symmetrical, so like they're stacked on top of each other. So you imagine your hips in like that, and then my elbows are my knees, so they're not able to pull them back out into a position. All right. So your normal knees, they're where those bones are stacked on top of each other and it's able to take a little bit more force. But then you imagine you draw a line down from here. So there's the top of your hip, and I draw that down. And what happens? It comes down into the outside. Now I know that's not a very straight line at the moment, but you can get what I mean. If you drop a plumb line from that hip and the whole way down, that direction of force is going up into the outside of it. So what's going to happen is all that force is going to congregate here on the outside of that knee. And then what also could happen is you're going to stretch these structures on the inside of that knee as well. So all of these things come together to be able to that cause pain or cause structures to become damaged in that one. Okay. How do I clear that? Okay. There we go. So what are the common how do I get this off? Sorry here now. Clear all my drawings. There we go. Now we got any more chats. Aoife, sorry, I'm just having a look in the chat here, see what's going. Left kneecap keeps clicking quite loud, not sore, feels like ligament or something out of place. And Aoife, knee tightness from pain into knee, but no pain. Tightness knee from running. Painful knee, but not pain when running. Okay, so you're not sore when you're running. Okay, that's an interesting one. So Paul, I'm going to cover your kneecaps here now on this point, okay? So what we want to look at is what are the common knee injuries, all right? So this is my knee. I just took this today. And what we're going to look at is where is your kneecap, all right? So your kneecap sits around about there. So that's what we want to be able to look at. And when your kneecap starts to click, now imagine your kneecap is supposed to run through a little groove. It's going to run through what we call between your two femoral condyles, all right? Now what happens is that, sorry, where we got this way. What happens if that doesn't run through there evenly, it's going to scrape off either side of those femoral condyles, those little bumps that are in your knuckles. All right, now when you're starting to feel that clicking in that knee, clicking is normal, but if it's clicking and it's sore, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to treat, because then what you're doing is you're wearing down the underside of that patella, that kneecap. And that's when you start to get that grinding pain. Might be sore going up and down stairs, could be sore if you do some hill sprints or you're walking downhill. And what's happening is that kneecap is compressing against that femoral condyle too much, more than likely because you're driving your knees too far forward over your toes, which is creating a little bit more of a force through that knee there a little bit more. Okay, so what's actually happening there with the kneecap is that you're just compressing it a little bit more. Now, in order to fix that, you would probably have to look at your hamstrings and pull them back into place, or loosen out your quads, because again, if your kneecap sits there, your quads are going to pull it back up into that position. So let's go back to a couple of slides here. Sorry there. So look at that. So there's your kneecap there, okay? So there's your kneecap there. And let's get this off. Let's clear this off. Let's see if I can get this turned on. All right, there we go. Perfect. It's never working out for me today. Okay, so there is your kneecap there. Now, see these muscles here? Now, what they do is they pull that kneecap up and they compress it into what we call our femoral condyle, into this position. And that's going to cause a little clicking or a grinding underneath it. So if those muscles are too tight because you're only running at a certain pace and your quads are kicking in, then what's going to happen is that kneecap's going to get sore. Okay, so that'll explain your clicking knees. Now, let's go back into, see if I can get rid of this. Just clear all my drawings. Good. And get this out. I'm learning loads today on Zoom and what we need to do. So, which are common knee injuries? If I'm gonna get yours now in a second. So, what we want to look at is what's a traumatic knee injury. So, something like, let's say you're playing a game of football, somebody comes in and tackles you from the side, and you get a dig into the knee on the side. And automatically, instantly, you feel pain. There's swelling. Later on, there's going to be a little bit of bruising. You're struggling to put weight down through that knee. That's what we call a traumatic injury. In the absence of pain and swelling and trauma or a high impact force, what you're going to have is what we call a non-traumatic injury, which means that it's going to be an overuse injury, or some muscle is working too hard, another muscle is not working enough, and then it goes from those knees sitting down on top of each other nice and easy to being crossing over onto one side or putting more pressure on the other side, or even if the other side starting to twist on top of it. So what do you want to look at here? So in the front of the knee, there's your patella. There's that kneecap there on that side. Sorry, I get my little drawing thing out here again. No. Come on. Right. So that's your kneecap there. Okay. And then what you have, that's what we call your patella. Then your quads come down and they attach onto it in here in this part. Okay. And they want to pull that back up. And then what you have down here is what we call your patella tendon. Now, you've ever heard of somebody that gets like jumper's knee. So this is a tendon down here that have a bit of a different structure than muscle on bone. And what that does is it kind of acts like a little bit of a spring with the muscle. Now, what happens if you're doing an awful lot of jumping, then that patella tendon is going to get sore. And you'll notice this, like if underneath that kneecap in there, just at the very bottom of it, you have that inferior patella pole, and that's going to be really, really sore if you tend to push. And that means you'll have a tendon issue in there. Or down in here, down a little bit further down in a bumpy, what you call your tibial tubercle, that's going to be a little bit sore as well. And that's where the two portions of that tendon meet and insert onto the bone. And they're generally the weak points that are going to be on it. And then more higher level athletes that are going to do a lot of jumping, that tendon's actually going to get quite sore as well in the center. So that's what you have in the front of the knee. So the main causes of pain in the front of the knee is going to be that patella. The underside of it's going to be really, really sharp. You might get a little bit of pain in the top of the hair, but 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a tightness in the quads, and that can be released out by foam rolling and doing a good stretch. And then what you're going to have is on the inside of the knee. So let's just clear out all these drawings. So on the inside of the knee, you have what we call our medial meniscus, which is about the thickness of about 3 fingers. So if you put 3 fingers on the inside of your knee, that's how big it's going to be. It actually is quite a big ligament, and then it's split into kind of your superficial fibers and your deep fibers. Now, what you're looking at with this is if somebody hits you on the outside of the knee and that comes in, and you're going to get pain on the outside of the knee, on the outside of the knee, then you're going to stretch the tissues on the inside of it. And what causes then is cause that ligament to fail. And then you end up being injured, but it's going to be really sore. There's going to be a lot of swelling in that. So other people that don't get injured on the football field, that have pain on the inside of the knee, What you can also have is what we call a pes anserine. So this is a little bursa down in the inside. And what happens with this, I'll just clear these and make this a little bit easier. What happens with this is you have a couple of different muscles and tendons that come down on the inside, and they all conjoin onto this one spot down in here that's going to be very, very sensitive to touch. And what happens is that a number of rubbing, that bursa starts to get rubbed off because it's sitting between a tendon and a bone. And then it starts to get inflamed and you start to get pain when you start to run or jog or walk up and down stairs. And the reason that that happens is that you're not strong enough in your glutes, or one muscle on the outside here is working a little bit too hard than it should be. And then that tendon and bursa starts to get irritated. All right. And then what we have in the outsides, we have this like big lateral ligament on the outside of that knee as well. And that's about 2 fingers thick. But it's like, imagine you put 4 fingers together, it's about that thickness there and that width. So it's actually very, very strong on that side. Very, very unlikely to get that outside ligament injured because it's very, very thick and very, very strong. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to have, it's going to be an overuse injury that's causing your pain rather than a specific injury. Now, as you get older into your later years, into maybe 50s and 60s, then that's when you start to look at degenerative arthritis that's going to happen in the inside of the knee. And what that happens is that's just general wear and tear. If you were to MRI my knees, there's probably going to be a little bit of wear and tear in it now after playing football for 20 or 35 years, or well, 35 years, probably longer than it should be. But anyway, that's a question for another time. But what happens with the knee is it takes an awful lot of load, and it's going to break down that meniscus. If your knees aren't strong enough and it's not getting enough support from your glutes or from your foot, then it's going to absorb the most of that force. So what you have to think about is when your body and when your leg is working as one system, is you have your foot, you have your ankle, then your calf and your knee, your thigh and your hips. Now, all of that works as one system. Now, everybody uses those muscles in a different way. So somebody might have a really, really big calf and that foot's going to be massively, massively strong, but then their quads and their knees are not that strong. And then maybe their hips have a good bit of strength in them as well. But his strategy to produce and absorb force and distribute it evenly up that leg is going to come, the majority of it is going to be absorbed by the foot. So what's going to happen there is that foot will take the majority of the load, and then the rest of the quads and hips don't have to do very much. Then on the opposite side of things, you could have somebody that has a very, very weak foot, but really, really big quads and really, really strong hips. And what happens with them is that just that load gets distributed further up that kinetic chain, up that leg and into the quads and the hamstrings, and they're able to tolerate that load. So what we tend to find out is we look for a chink in the armor, which part of that system is not working correctly and needs to be strengthened, and figuring out why it's not working. So if you have a runner that's kind of going, oh yeah, look, I do my 5Ks, absolutely fine. They use their quads and they use their soleus, which is a deeper muscle in the lower part of your calf. And then they decided to go out and do some sprinting. So what happens then is they're completely changing their mechanics. So they're using bigger muscles. They need to use their hips and their hamstrings, and their ankle and their knees have to absorb an awful lot more force. So when you're running, your knee has to take between 7 and 9 times body weight, depending on what speed you're going at. But then you're getting up into sprinting, and depending on how fast you're running and how much force you can produce, you can get up to 9, 12, 15 times your body weight. And 15 times your body weight, if you weigh 50 kg, is 750 kg. So it's a lot of weight that your knee has to tolerate when you're going into those sprinting positions. So as you're running through that, if that person who's getting really, really sore, then we're going to start to look at, okay, right, they were able to tolerate the slow running, but the faster running just was not able to. So first of all, we look at the foot, then we look at the hamstring and the glutes and see where they're producing power from. 9 times out of 10, they'll be able to produce the power, but they won't be able to absorb the force as that foot lands on the ground. And that's when we start to like problem solve and start to look at their body working as an entire unit. So a lot of the time, we're not going to have a pathology, or not going to have something wrong with the knee, something structurally wrong. And if there is, you're able to tell it very, very, very quickly. That knee won't straighten. It'll be very uncomfortable if I go to kind of put a little bit more pressure down to trying to straighten it. You won't be able to deep squat. You've very, very limited kind of range going up and down the stairs. So if there's something massively wrong with your knee, we're going to know about very, very quickly through pain. But the majority of pain, the majority of injuries that come in there is going to be what we call an overuse injury, so a fatigue injury. So sometimes people want to go for a hike and they haven't hiked in about maybe a year or so, and then those muscles just got a little bit tired halfway through it. They weren't able to control that knee and hold it in that nice little steady position there. And what happens is then the next 20,000 steps, there was a little bit of a twist or an irritation in it, and they pissed off the inside of the knee. So generally, that's what happens when it comes down to overuse injuries. Now, if you leave it go on a little bit longer, then you're going to run into a little bit more problems where mechanically that knee is not working as well as it should. And then that little bit of kind of muscle fatigue has now turned into your actual pattern of movement. And then you're constantly twisting down through there, or you're constantly making that tendon at the front of the knee work an awful lot harder. So that's when you start to come into what we call a tendonitis. And that means that that tendon is not able to take the load. It's not very, very springy and pliable like it's naturally supposed to be. And then it's actually just distributing that load a little bit differently through the knee. When that starts to happen, again, you're into the kind of like a vicious circle here. The knee gets fatigued, your mechanics change, your tendons aren't absorbing the load as much. And then what's left to be able to take the pressure off it is the cartilage, is that meniscus on the inside of the knee. And generally 9 times out of 10, that's going to break down in the older generations. When you get her like above 40, 50, depending if you looked after your knees, you're going to kind of have you may have a little bit of degenerative arthritis in that. But as I said, arthritis is just like getting gray hairs. It's going to happen to everybody. I have a bit of it in my back, probably have a bit of it in my knee. My ankle's pretty much screwed at this point, but it's not causing me any pain, because my body doesn't recognize it as being damaged. It's just another surface of it. It's another process of aging. And you look at wrinkles, like, I mean, your wrinkles or your skin is falling apart. But if you saw wrinkles on a baby, you'd be kind of going, right, there's something wrong here. But because you see it on an older person or anyone that gets them as they age, you're going to just turn around and kind of go, oh, it's a normal part of aging. So you're just going to go get up and get on with it. Sorry, I wasn't finishing that one. The other kind of injuries you can get are ligament, but they're generally high force traumas, and they're the ligaments on the inside or the outside of the knee. And also you have your cruciate ligaments, which are deep down inside. They're the inside medial ligament, generally 4 to 6 weeks to heal if you have a mild to moderate sprain. Outside ligaments can be a little bit more difficult, because it's a more robust and a stronger ligament, and it generally tends to distribute a little bit more load up the lateral part of that shin. So you need to be able to rehab that an awful lot more, and it takes just that little bit longer. Patella kneecap, generally, if you really, really piss it off, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to settle down. But do not, if you're sore when you're running, don't go running on it again, because you're just going to annoy it any further. Like, imagine you have a bruise in your arm and you keep punching at the bruise. That's what you're doing when you go to run if you have a sore knee. Some people might get better as they run, and that's where I'm going to come on to your question, Aoife. Some people might get better as they run, but that's just down to their mechanics. Okay. So what have we got in here? Sorry, I missed on the ACL. Sorry, the ITB friction syndrome, that is a pain on the outside of the knee, and that side where you have your ITB band on your ITB band just runs down the outside of there. Now, generally, everybody says, oh yeah, it's a friction syndrome, you need to rest for 2 to 3 months. We just need to rest the outside of that knee, take the swelling and the effusion out of it, and then we're able to rehab it, and then we're able to kind of get other muscles to kick in, which will support that and help that lengthen a little bit more. Okay. There we go to here. Everybody all right so far? Any more questions that we're going to come into it? If I'm just going to address your question now. So knee tightness from running, painful to kneel, but no pain when you're running. So if you're really sore when you're kneeling down, Aoife, you're putting an awful lot of pressure through that kneecap. And 9 times out of 10, it means that there is something underlying underneath that kneecap that's a little bit irritated, that's pushing against the bone. Number 2, there may be a little bit of swelling that maybe is causing that stiffness when you're running, or there can be a combination of both of them. Now, what you do with that is, with females, when it comes down to running, 9 times out of 10, their glutes and their hamstrings are not going to be strong enough. I would focus on trying to get those glutes working a little bit more. Now, in order to improve that, if your knee's getting tight from running, what I would do is I'd change it from a long distance run to a shorter distance run. And what I mean, what's going to happen there is you're going to use your glutes, your hamstrings, and your calves if you start to run a lot faster. Now, I'm not trying to kill you with a sprint, but I do want you almost getting to your like 80-85% max effort runs for about 60 meters, building up to your max speed over that 60 meters, and then giving yourself a minute, 2 minutes break. Now, it's not going to be a very cardiovascular taxing session, but it will get those muscles fired that we need to use to protect that leg. It may have a little bit of flare up in the knee if there is a bit of a swelling in that knee, but it shouldn't really affect it too badly because the risk of it outweighs the reward. The reward is we get those hamstrings and calves to kick in a little bit further, and those quads start to disengage. And then what I'd probably consider is like, what's your job? Are you sitting, standing? Are you driving? What kind of other exercises do you do? Are you in the gym? All of these factors get taken into play to look at your body as an entire system to figure out what the problem is. Doesn't sound like it's too bad at the moment, but it does. It's giving you a kind of an orange flag to let you know that, right, you need to have a look at this and take care of it a little bit further. All right. Hopefully some of the other stuff I'll cover in this will give you a little bit more ideas of what you need to be able to do. So I'll touch back on that again. Everybody still with me? Yes. Jerry there eating away, having fun there, guys. Yeah, no worries. No worries, Aoife, you're welcome for that. Pop. Any questions, please pop it into the group. Anybody having a beer? Anybody's having a nice cup of tea? It's very muggy over here in Ireland. Wonderful. Okay, right, let's get back onto this. All right, so what happens with the injury cycle is, okay, you have a little bit of a trauma, you have a little bit of an overuse. So that impact that has is it causes a little bit more fatigue. The fatigue leads into a faulty mechanics. When your faulty mechanics get overloaded again, it overloads the structure, then the structure get injured. And then that is the vicious cycle that happens. And what we'll see is trauma, week 1, week 2, impact fatigue. Oh, I gave it 3 weeks rest. I went back at it again. I went back at it. It's still sore, but it's not too bad, but I'll keep on going is your faulty mechanics. Then your faulty mechanics kind of go another week later, go, shit, I've actually done something here. It's really pissed it off. That's your overloaded. And then eventually what happens is that structural injury is going to cause meniscus, tendon, or it's just going to be a little bit of swelling that's going to stop those muscles working correctly. Okay, what's next? All right, so which position are you sore in, right? So you got to look at your mechanics of your walking. As I said, you're going to use those bigger muscles, those quads on the front of the leg. So those big on the right hand side there, those big massive quads there. And what you're going to use is you're going to use a soleus, that bottom one down on the bottom green on the right hand side. So they're the 2 muscles you use when you're walking. And if you do an awful lot of walking, you're always going to use them. But then if you sit in your butt during the day, what's going to happen is that you're not going to use those glutes and those hamstrings. So they end up getting switched off and they're not going to be used. So what happens when you're walking is quads and soleus. But then what happens when you're sitting, if you have pain when you're sitting, it means that these kind of tissues at the front of the leg are getting a little bit too tight and they're pulling on that kneecap. And that means that you have an imbalance. So the front muscles are maybe too tight, and then that means the back muscles are too long, and they're all not working together as one system. So what happens there is when your muscles are too tight or they're not working correctly is your nervous system is just an alarm system. It tells you something is wrong. So what happens there is that nervous system tends to give you a little bit of a jolt and kind of go, here, something's fucking wrong here. You need to pay attention to it. So you either need to stretch it, foam rollers, but don't do nothing. Doing nothing, rest is not rehab. You rest it, yes, it might get better, but it never fully resolves. And that's what you want to be able to, to get to. You want to get back to your working perfectly, not just sitting there and kind of going, oh yeah, grand, sure, I can't be arsed doing anything about it. I'll be able to struggle along with it for a while because it always will come back and bite you in the ass and one way or the other. Like, So you have your mechanics of walking. So if you're sore when you're walking, generally you're overloading two muscles. If you're sore when you're sitting, generally the muscles are too tight from you doing something else, or you're constantly sitting down, you're not doing enough mobility work or stretching. And then finally your mechanics of your running, it depending on what speed you're running at, whether you use your quads or soleus. So generally as a rule of thumb, if you're running around just under 4 minutes a kilometer, that's about 5 meters per second. That's generally when you start to kick in the posterior chain, your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves. So if you're running above that, it's always going to be quads and soleus. And that's why we like to get people into those little bit of a sprinting, into those sprinting mechanics, which makes things work a little bit easier. All right. Or to get those hamstrings and those glutes to kick in. And I know I seem to be talking an awful lot about your hamstrings and glutes, but they are very, very important. So now we're back to this triangle here. What strategy do you use? Some people might not use the foot that much or the calf, but as you get further down that pyramid, they start to use more your quads, hamstrings, hip, or lower back. And that's a perfectly fine strategy. That means their system is balanced and it's able to tolerate the load at what they're doing. And it means that it's working for them. Because one, if your calf is not strong enough, but your hamstrings are really strong, system is balanced out. If your calf is weak, and then your hamstring is weak, and then your hip and your lower back or your foot have to take an awful lot of the load, then something's going to break down there. So there's always a kink in that chain that you need to be able to. There's always a kink in that chain that you need to be able to fix. Again, on the other side of the thing, some people might be very, very strong in their quad and their calf, which will be able to protect things for walking. But then you start to put them into a position where they want to go sprinting, and they start to break down because their hamstrings or their hip or their foot is not that strong. So you need to be able to look at, right, what are you currently doing? What do I think you're able to do? And how long do I think you're able to do that for without becoming fatigued and beginning to injure something? Okay. So what we have a look at is when people start to get really, really sore is they start to change. And what they start to do is they start to avoid using that leg. And we use a very, very simple test on this, is we just get people to do a little bit of a squat, even if it's only a quarter squat. You don't have to go down too far. And then I get them to stay there for maybe 20, 30 seconds and close their eyes. And what I'm looking for is how much pressure they have down on each foot. If there's more pressure on one foot than there is on the other, then they're either avoiding using that leg or they're favoring using that leg. And that gives us a bit of an idea of where to start from. And we can see a lot of people that go down, they'll come down nice and even in the squat, but then they'll start to veer off to one side or veer off to the other side, which is going to tell me that once they go down into that little deeper angles, that's not going to, their body doesn't like it and they want to offload it a little bit more. So the fear avoidance side of things comes in and it kind of goes, it gets an input. Like this is a sensor in your knee or in your muscle or in your quad. What the brain does is it processes it. It kind of figures out, right, is this a good input that I'm getting? Is the knee in a good place? Or is it kind of, are those tissues being stretched a little bit too much? And then it decides kind of going, right, I think this is okay. So it doesn't give you out any pain. So the pain is the output. So what happens there, if that's in a normal process, right, you squat down, right, a little bit of pressure in the knee, tissues are stretching, brain says, right, this is fine, decides that there's no danger here at all, and then it allows you to continue the movement. Now, when you have something that's really, really sore, and let's say you go to do a lunge or you go to walk up a stairs, and you kind of go, brain does, oh, geez, there's a lot of force going through this knee, processes it, don't really like this at all, right, decision, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of pain to let you know that something's happened. And then the output is that you feel a little bit of discomfort in that knee. And then you go on to the other side of things when people are really pissed off their knee, is kind of going, right, oh, sure, I'll go run down the hill for the next 2 kilometers and see what happens. You'll get about 30 seconds into it and your brain is kind of going, your brain is kind of going, okay, right, Grant, yeah, this is actually way too much for you. And it's saying that this is actually going to be dangerous. You're going to injure yourself. The decision is, right, I'm going to give you pain. And the output is you're going, oh, fuck, that hurt. Simple as that. So the fear mechanics. So what happens then is you get something painful is you kind of go, oh, I better not use that leg a little bit too much. So again, the input is that, right, it was a little bit sore. What's the idea here is it needs to protect it as much as it can. Then what happens is you start to avoid load. So you start to favor one leg more than the other. That results in altered mechanics and then results in an overuse of the other area as time goes on. You will still have the pain through the leg on the opposite side because it's going to go, right, this isn't working as well as it should. And if you go back to this one just here again now, so if somebody is not using their leg as much as they could, what's going to happen is that, right, you're walking, but you're kind of limping on that one leg. The input is that your brain is kind of going, okay, all right, something's going on here. We're not putting enough load down through here because they're afraid. Fear leads to kind of, okay, right, something's wrong here, so I don't like it. So your brain processes that as being danger because you're afraid of doing it, because your previous experience of walking on that leg was painful. Your brain decides, right, that is sore, and then it gives an output, right, give you pain or sensitize that area to make sure that you're not using it. And the result is that you don't use that leg and it's still sore. And that's just your brain's psychological way of processing danger and telling you to stay away from using that leg. So how do you overcome that? We basically put you into positions that your knee is, that your kind of brain kind of goes, oh, okay, right, this feels all right. So I'll put you in like a quarter squat to get you holding on a bit of weight in that leg. And then I'll start to apply a little bit of force, either the front of the knee or the back of the knee, to see if we can get those quads to kick in. If you get the quads or the hamstrings to kick in, then your brain's kind of going, oh, hold on, we forgot about these for a little bit of time. All right, okay, now these are working again. Let's see if we can put a little bit of weight down through it. You have a little bit of fear going on, but actually, oh yeah, that starts to feel a little bit better. And then that's when you come into the physio and they kind of do a little bit of massage, or they do some exercise, do some strengthening, and they kind of go, Jesus, yeah, that feels an awful lot better. I didn't fix anything in your knee at all, but we just tricked that brain to kind of thinking, okay, this is starting to be a little bit more safe here now. So I'll dampen down that pain response, and then we'll start to be able to get this leg working again. Because the whole idea of your system and your brain is, number one, to make sure you're standing upright. If you're not standing upright, then you're injured, then it wants to try and protect it. So the whole idea is, it's like your brain, especially when you're it's in pain. It's like a puppy on a wooden floor for the first time. It doesn't really know what's going on. It gets really, really shaky, and it's not able to, it's a new experience for him. So he's just a little bit afraid of it. Or the same thing if you have a child going on something that's really, really high, to not be used to it. And what we try and do is we just try and trick that, reassure that nervous system that everything is okay by giving them strengthening exercises in a safe environment that's able to load it, and it's able to progress that load without re-injuring it, or without going too far too quickly or too soon. And then that makes things an awful lot easier for you as you're coming back from rehab. So what we're going to look at is, over like the 6 weeks, when you have that little bit of pain and you start to get sore, you kind of go, all right, okay, yeah, it's grand. Oh, it's the first stage was, oh, I hurt that a little bit, I'll rest it for 1 or 2 days. But the system's never really recovered. So what happens is then, oh yeah, I'll go out and do that again. Yeah, it wasn't too bad, but I'm still able to run, but I'll just run at a slower pace, or I'll just do it at a slower pace, or I'll just do the warm up. But then you kind of get warmed up and you're kind of going, oh, maybe I'll play a game. So what happens is the system gets fatigued over that 6 weeks. And then as the time goes on, then your system it takes less and less load or training or duration or weights or movement to actually piss it off. And you actually end up being sore in the morning all the time. And then the whole attitude is that, well, it's not bad enough to stop, so I'll keep going until I'm broken. And then eventually then you have to call us, and then you come in and we get you sorted. So the whole idea is like, it'll get better, it'll be fine. But have you always had an injury and kind of go, look, it's grand, it's not bad enough for me to put the amount of effort I need to put into it to fix it, so I'm able to go on and go about my business. And unfortunately, if you're going to, in an ideal world, yes, we'll do 6 weeks training with everybody, get you an awful lot stronger. But the idea, what we want to do here, is to be able to educate you on why it got sore, not fix it for you. So we're doing a little bit of manual therapy to kind of reduce down the pain. But then at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get you stronger and trying to educate you on why that happened. Could be because of a previous injury. Could be some people generally tend to have a little bit more knee pain because they've had a knee injury, or because they've had a foot injury, and your body is still trying to protect itself when it's walking or running or doing the activities that you're doing. So what we want to do is, if you have a traumatic injury, you want to protect it, you want to rest it, you want to ice it, compression, elevation. So ice is a good idea for us. And what we're going to try and do with that is ice in a sandwich bag with lots and lots of water, and place it over the injured area. Leave that there for 20 to 30 minutes. Do that 4 or 5 times a day if you have the time to do it. 4 to 5 times a day sounds excessive, but it's better we always tend with ice, we always tend to like overdo it a little bit more. Everybody's on kind of focused on, we find the sweet spot. Oh, it's exactly 25 minutes and 30 seconds. No, it's personal preference. Come down to it, figure out if that's making it better, do more of it, especially in that acute phase of it. Okay. Rested, obviously, you're not going back running again if you've really pissed it off or you've had a bad injury or fall. You get a bit of a compression onto it, so get some tight. We have leg compression shorts, or the what you call them, the compression trousers. We'll put them that way. I know that's not even the right word, but it is 8:30 at night, so hopefully you'll all forgive me. But the compressing pants, the long ones that you can put on, they will help that knee a little bit more. You can also get a tubey grip bandage in your pharmacy, or you can wear a support to provide a little bit of pressure on it. And then also kind of keep that knee elevated. If it's a high traumatic injury, it's going to be a lot of swelling in there. And don't be alarmed if you injure that knee and then you start to get sore down the shin or into the calf. Remember, gravity is pushing that effusion, that swelling down the leg and into that calf. So it's going to make things a little bit different. And that exactly happens when it happens on, like, if you injure the outside of your knee, the outside of that calf muscle doesn't want to work as well because the fluid is flowing down in between the muscles. There's a bit of too much pressure in there. Your brain's kind of going, well, there's pressure in here, so I'm not going to make that muscle work as fast as well as it should. So then we need to flush out the swelling out of it and then try to get that muscle to kick back in again. Non-traumatic ones, generally the easiest thing for you to do without having to go see a physio is just do some foam rolling and do some stretching. That will try to reset the system. Then depending on how bad it is, it may rebalance itself again. It may just go back to normal the way it was. It may, as you do one or two little strengthening exercises that you might have done previously, and then you start to build resilience. But the problem is that once people release it and they kind of feel, oh yeah, this feels grand, and then they go out and they run 10 or 15K and they kind of go, all right, okay, that wasn't a good idea. Or to go into the garden or to climb up and down a ladder for 4 or 5 hours in a day, or they're fucking barrels of Guinness up and over the shoulder and onto a truck. So what's the common questions that we find? Basically, you want to use ice in a sandwich bag with lots of water. Your supports are very, very good and very, very important because they provide that compression. When can you walk or run? Generally, when that pain starts to settle down, I would always rule on the err on the side of caution. If you can walk 10K, then we can start running. And if you walk 10K without any pain, then I would be able to get you to start running. How can you make it better? Right, you need to protect it. Get that swelling out of it. Use your foam rolling. Get some very, very basic exercises, which I sent on in the blogs that were during the week. And there's also a lot of blogs on the website, so you can kind of have a look out to see which exercises work better. Now, rest is good for us, all right, because you're avoiding the exercises, but it does not mean that your body is ready to go back into the exercise that it was doing before. You need to be able to rebalance that system, get that strategy that you're using to produce force and absorb force when you're running or walking. You need to get that reset a little bit more. So it's more about looking at not just the knee, but what the knee has to do. The knee has to distribute load up that leg and into the hips and the back. If the muscles around that are not able to tolerate the load that's going through it, then that joint is going to get pissed off, and then that's what's going to happen with that. So at the other side of things as well, everybody says it used to heal when you were younger, but a lot has changed. Now we're not the same animals that our parents were. We have busier lives. We have a lot more acute spikes in load, whereas our parents or grandparents might be out and about, walking around fields and walking the roads an awful lot more than we would. Right now, we're more in a sedentary lifestyle where we're kind of sitting down an awful lot, and then we jump up out of the seat and we're off for running, playing five-a-side and stuff like that again. Athletes, so the people that have the time to go into the gym are actually getting an awful lot faster and an awful lot stronger. So then they have to contend. You have to try and contend with that. And if you have a sedentary job, then you're trying to go into the gym and do some work to try and get stronger to compete with those athletes. Then it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you because you spend the day sitting and they spend the day lifting planks of wood around the building site. So yeah. And then the last thing of part of things is your recovery strategies. So people don't tend to think that recovery is important enough. Recovery and fatigue is probably the most undervalued part of rehab that people don't pay attention to. Having a day of rest or getting a good night's sleep will do you far better than doing a training session in the gym. Now, in saying that, we don't want you avoiding every training session because you want to go sleep. But if you're kind of going, Jesus, I've done a lot this week, I don't think my body's up for it. Go in and do a light session. Go in and do a short sprint session that's going to work on your nervous system and getting the speed up a little bit more, but it's not going to be too taxing on your muscles and your joints. And just a nice little short session like that should help you recover from games or runs or whatever you're doing in your daily lives. So the take home points when it comes down to knee pain, don't be alarmed unless you've had a high force injury where a cow has come and kicked you in the side of the leg and then your leg is really, really sore. It's generally just going to be an overuse injury, but just don't let it go on too long. General rule of thumb, if it hasn't settled down in 2 weeks, it probably needs a little bit of hand for professional help, or you need a bit of advice. Judging by pain and swelling, if there's a lot of pain and swelling in there, you know there's a structure in there that is injured and you need to look after it. Seek some help after 2 to 3 weeks. It's no harm. Reach out to us. We're available on WhatsApp and an email. We can give you some advice and kind of make sure that it's not something that needs to be seen straight away. But we can also give you a couple of self-help tips when you're not with us. Rest rarely resolves the issue. As you know, you couldn't have issue from the past until you put the work into it. You need to earn the right to go back to your sport and earn the right to go back running. And that's by putting in the work. Also, if you had an MRI and it kind of goes, oh, well, I've damage here, I've damage there, you can MRI my knee, you can MRI everyone else's knee. They're going to have some sort of damage in there. So abnormalities found on MRI that don't match up clinically to what we see when we test the joint, it's just an abnormal finding. Everybody has them. You could see them in your backs and your shoulders and your necks, and you're going to see them in 50% of the population over the age of 50 or 55. So what we're going to look at is a little bit of exercises that we can help. Oh, sorry, let's get back out of this there again. How do I get out of this? There we go. So we're going to look at one or two exercises here. So these are the exercises that we set out for people. Open. There we go. All right. So first exercise, what we're going to call this is called a floor reach. All right. So generally what we're looking at the angle of where your hips are at in this position, and also what the foot is doing. Now I just have two 5 kg dumbbells there. Now, as I reach them down towards the ground, I want pressure on the front part of that foot. A lot of people, when they're lifting weights off the ground, they tend to go back to their heel. But in the athletic population, you're never on your heels. You're always on that front foot. If you're running, you're depending what speed you're running at, you kind of want that mid-foot kind of landing. So why would you put pressure down through a heel to get stronger when in an athletic population or a runner, you want to put force down through the mid portion of that foot? So if you're a runner and you're trying to strengthen these things up, what we want you to do is, as you reach down into this floor reach position, we want that knee relatively straight. We want a nice big stretch in that hamstring. We want the weight down through the mid portion of that foot. And then as you're coming back up, we want to see a bit of intent through that foot that gets that glute and that hamstring. Let's go up a little bit further. Gets that glute and that hamstring to come forward. And it wants that glute and hamstring to pull yourself back up. So if you're sitting here, all right, this is the top part of my body. This is the bottom part of my body. Now, if I lean forward into that position, what actually happens is your glutes and your hamstrings on this side are actually act as like a pulley, and they pull down to pull you back up. Now, a lot of people might move from their back and they use their back to pull themselves up. And that's not really a good strategy, because your glutes and your hamstrings are designed to pull you back up rather than your back. So what we want to do is we want to round this back as much as we can as we go down one more time. Now, see the way that back is rounded? My neck should be probably down a little bit more than that. It's not ideal, but I have the intent to push through that foot to come back up into that position. So that's what we call a floor reach. You can do it at 5 or 10 kg weight. Make sure that other foot is close enough to that heel that you have the majority of the weight on that left leg. And this is just here. That right leg is just there for a little bit of balance. Okay. So let's come on there a little bit further. And all right, you want to get, yeah. So this one is just, you want to just be lying on your back. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get your hip flexors into that. Now, the key thing with this is when you bring your knee up into that position, yes, those hip flexors are going to be working, but I want that foot to kick up into the roof. Now, I'll do that in the next exercise as I kick up. Now, that foot starts to kick up and try and create a little bit more pressure through the front of that quad. You want that quad to be nice and strong in that position, and you want this leg to be able to tolerate the pressure that this is pulling away from it. So it's just a nice little simple one, especially because we're sitting down all days. Those hip flexors generally are shortened, but they're not strong in that position. So we want to make sure they're nice and active. Now what we want to have now, when you're running or when you're walking, when you're on that leg, you're always landing on one leg. So we need to have a strong core. So a side plank strengthens all that lateral side of that body. And then when you add in a little bit of rotation, it throws you off balance. So that knee has to stabilize with that shoulder forward. That knee has to stabilize, that hip has to stabilize, that ankle has to stabilize. And it's a nice exercise to get better at because it gets that whole torso involved and it gets you being able to work that little bit harder. You need core strength to be able to move, and you need core strength to be able to run and absorb force. I don't know where I've run off to here now in this point. I was just going to get a step. Okay. Next exercise. So what we're going to do is it's just a little bit of landing. So if you stand on a little bit of step, I want you to practice landing. Now, as running is jumping from one foot to another. If you don't practice landing on that foot, you're not going to be able to absorb the force, and then something, your ankle, your knee, your Achilles, your hip, your back is going to take the load. So practice stepping on the step, jumping down, trying to hold that balance. Make sure you have that balance held before you come out of that stance position. A lot of people will jump down and then as they're falling, then they'll come back out of it. But I want you to be able to land there and hold it very, 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 very still. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to do a nice little reverse lunge. And when you're holding that weight in the front, now what's going to happen as you drop down, sorry, let's go on to the next leg here as you get down. There we go. Now what's happening is those glutes are lengthening into that position and that in there. Your torso is nice and upright. That weight's trying to pull you forward. So that back leg on the left-hand side is trying to keep you upright and trying to keep you backwards. Your core muscles are trying to keep you in that solid position. And it's a nice little exercise to get those glutes and hamstrings, plus a little bit of that quad involved with it. But also what you can do is make sure you have a bit of intent down through that leg. Don't be afraid to put pressure down through that knee. And you'd be surprised how many people do those lunges. And I come in there and I push the outside of that knee, that they're just not stable in that position whatsoever. All right. So there's the exercise that we're going to do. I'll pop them up in the Resync Physio group. That's the one on Facebook. And yeah, check it out, guys. If you have any issues with it, just drop us a line or drop us a question. And I will be happy to take any more. Oh yeah, sorry. This is with the question, just before we get to the questions, is if you've tried to rehab your knee before and it hasn't worked out, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So if you have problems, go and see a physio. Give us a shout. We're more than willing to help or put a question into the group. Hope you enjoyed that, guys. I'm just going to leave it to you. Please let me know if you have any questions there now on that. Did we enjoy it? Did we think it was good? Did we think it was the right level of information? What are your take-home points? Just pop anything into the group there just to let me know that you kind of you did absorb what I was saying. And then I can leave you alone for your dinner or your biscuits or your beers. What kind of biscuits, Paul? Everybody all right? That was good. Great stuff. Custard creams. The good old custard creams. Now, are they the expensive ones or are they Tesco finest? Oh, God, thanks. Useful. The exercises too. No worries, Alex, at all. Super. Know what I need to do now. Just need to do it. Perfect, Aoife. Look, if you have any problems, just throw it in the group or send us a message. Our WhatsApp number is on the website. But yeah, guys, glad you enjoyed it. We'll be doing another one on hip pain next week. But what I wanted to probably figure out is, if everybody just leave me a quick message here. Would you rather I do general knees and hips, or would you? Oh, you remember this next week, Aoife. Perfect. Would you rather do knees or hips, or would you rather do specific injuries like Achilles tendon or patella tendon or cartilage injuries in your knee? Just give us a little bit of feedback on there, whether you'd rather that or specific injuries or just like joints and areas of the body that are injured. Let me know what you think, guys. Hips. So hips in general, or inside of the hips, outside of the hips, hips. Hips will be next month. Thanks, Mel. Perfect, Alex. All right, guys. Don't forget, if you're not joined up to that Facebook group, it's Resync Physio Free Injury as an advice group. Join it there. There's lots of free information on it. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend and the weather picks up and we don't get pissed on. Okay, take care, guys. Thanks very much.